Hi everyone. Hi everyone. Well, I would say good to see you all, but I actually can't. Kunle and I can't see you all really. But thank you for joining our Friday webinar. Really, really exciting. We're discussing all things overcoming barriers and building sustainable businesses. How do we grow sustainable businesses in the social sector? Um, Especially for organizations that are Black and ethnic minority led. So really, really exciting. And we've got a superstar guest to help us essentially answer that question and kind of guide us through. And by the end of this hour, by half one, we'll have grown all our businesses and it'll all be sustainable and we would have cracked it with Kunle's support. So yeah, really, really
I
exciting.
don't know about that.
Yeah, no. It's a lot of pressure, Kunle, but you'll crack it. I have faith. I have total faith. Um, as people kind of join, a few bits of kind of housekeeping, which I'll repeat throughout, just because people will be kind of coming and going kind of during, which is the way this will work is in a minute I'll introduce Kunle. We'll do a bit of chatting, kind of one-to-one chat between us on the topic of what are the current barriers for growing trading, what are the current challenges for the sector, and then, what are some potential solutions around building sustainable businesses. And then there'll be plenty of time for Q&A after that. And the way that will work, folks, for those that haven't used Zoom webinar before, is that there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your kind of toolbar. And then on that, feel free throughout the kind of webinar to kind of whack in questions. That'll get sent to me, and then I'll kind of interject with questions during the webinar. So that's how that'll work. For those that don't know me, I'm Robin. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Policy here at School for Social Entrepreneurs. So I kind of lead on like essentially kind of how we grow and how we sustain as an organization. And then in a previous life, I was a social entrepreneur myself. So I used to run an organization called Coach Bright for 10 years, which was a social mobility organization helping disadvantaged young people get into schools and workplaces. So I've jumped the fence from frontline organization to infrastructure bodies. So really keen to share kind of thoughts on challenges we had there as well. And then in the hot seat, the real reason we're here is we've got the brilliant Kunle, CEO of Voice for Change England. He's going to talk us through all his wisdom and all his insights and also all his challenges as well. So CEO of Voice for Change England, the national membership body for Black and minority ethnic kind of VCS organizations. Kunle, delighted to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Delighted to be here. Thank you, Robert.
Fab. And I think what we'll do is we'll just crack on. And I think the premise, Kunle, is that it's meant to be a bit of a cozy chat between me and you, and then there'll be questions that fire in left, right, and center. So it'll be very, very exciting.
No, that's fine. I mean, I can't see anybody, so it will be
Yeah.
intimate.
Yeah, and actually this will be fun because we know each other a bit, but I actually haven't asked you stuff like this before, so this will be really enjoyable. And I mean, the first
That's
one,
true.
just to help set some context, is how did you become kind of, your journey to becoming CEO of Voice for Change England, and why you've chosen to take this path?
Um, I've always, I suppose, volunteered from a young age, but my background was in local government and policy. Senior policy officer in London Borough in North London, Camden. Um, and before that, I trained in economic development. So under Ken Livingstone at the GLC, I was one of his trainees. I have a long kind of trail that led up to, first of all, trying to understand how the British economy works. From then going into policy, um, and meeting a lot of the kind of movers and shakers of today at a very early stage. So there was an organization called Twin Trading, who were theorizing and beginning to develop ideas about how to engage with developing world countries and improve trade conditions. And twin trading went on to become fair trade, and started there. There was the ecology unit for London, which also went on to set up the environmental policy, and a huge influence on not just local government, but also in terms of campaigners around that issue. So I was blessed in my kind of training period. I've been exposed to a lot of very talented individuals who would go on to become, I suppose, players in government. Probably a time when I think Britain was going through a lot of social turmoil. And we were, particularly in the 80s, faced with dealing with issues of how we would develop policies around things like women, race, ethnicity, disability, etc. And certainly overlying this was also a key sense of looking at the economy and economics and its role. I think perhaps today there's been a shift in that the focal point has been much more on identity, and in some ways there's some shade has been placed around economics. But for me, economics is the thing that always underpinned the question of how we addressed issues of equality.
Yeah, and I've heard this phrase people talk about, Kunle, about to achieve racial justice or any sort of kind of racial equity, or to do that, you need economic justice, like, and that's kind of, you need economic justice to pull it off. And that's a big part of what we're talking about today. You know, how do we grow sustainable businesses? How do we do that in our sector? And to help frame that, it might be just interesting for those that don't know Voice for Change England, one, a little bit about Voice for Change England, but also two, kind of the business model behind Voice for Change England, kind of how that side of things work.
Yeah, so having left local government, I also had a passion for the arts. I did a lot of freelance work with organizations like the British Library, the British Museum, Science Museum. And then my brother-in-law told me about an opportunity that was going at an organization called Voice for Change that I'd never heard of. I applied and got a job as a comms officer, went in originally as director of comms. And then the director left. I knew the sector pretty well, actually, even before I'd gone into it, because I'd been active in kind of anti-racist circles. And so became very much a stalwart from about 2013 onwards in the directorship role. In terms of the kind of barriers that I saw at the time for startups, I think there's kind of three phases. Around about the early 2000s to about 2010, it was very much, as I was going into Voice for Change, about getting more Black and minority businesses off the ground and making sure that the numbers were up. By the time Voice for Change wrote its first report on social enterprise, the ground had shifted, and that was around about 2013. And it was very much, we had the numbers, but the question of viability was now very much on the table. And I remember reading the report, which said basically for every a startup in enterprise that happens, 3 BME startups would close the same year. So the question that kind of consumed me was, what is it that gives us that stat? And how do we actually improve it? How do we create conditions to improve the viability of those that want to actually enter into social enterprise, whether it's doing something that is led to enhancements in your community, like family intervention and crisis, or doing work in education, doing work across, food production. We needed to work through how we could improve the chances of those startups succeeding. And then, as time went on, the question of scalability and not so much about viability anymore, though it remains an issue in the background. But you would meet social entrepreneurs who'd been successful, who then were looking for their first 250,000, 500,000 to $1 million of investment. And we're basically saying, look, there's nowhere we can go. So in terms of as much as we want to scale up, this is it. And unless things open up, we are not going to be able to reach that next level on, the ladder. So that's what kind of, I think, preoccupied me. And certainly was the basis for then looking at things like not only the available tools for social entrepreneurs, but looking at social investment. Around about 2015, Voice for Change, with support from one of the banks, we were commissioned to look at the experience of organizations that had gone through grant funding and how that worked out. And we produced a report called Bridging the Gap, which basically indicated that about a third of organizations, and we looked at all different sizes of organizations, were happy. And about another third who gone through grant funding, when they'd been knocked back, would not go back to the funder again. And then you had a group in the middle who were like neither, I suppose, dissatisfied or particularly satisfied. So one of the things that came out of that report was a series of recommendations. And one of those recommendations was that we needed, as an infrastructure body, to take social investment more seriously. And we needed to consider, how we were going to support the sector, being able to understand the whole issue. And I think that, there's some, at that time, there were some great organizations that really did help us in deepening both my understanding and the understanding of my board in terms of the direction that we wanted to go. So the social investment business, Barrow Cadbury, who funded some of our early kind of research work and awareness raising, and CAF, who came to our AGM and spoke to our members, the Lottery Commission also, who sorry, the lottery funders it was then, who actually began to take more seriously the question of how you connect talent with the resources to actually bring that talent through. And I've always seen it very much in that way, which is not so much about just having access to capital, but how do we actually make sure that the resources that are available connect to the best talent that's out there to make sure they maximize their impact.
And I guess on that part, Kunle, because that's pretty startling, like the Bridging the Gap report, kind of a third of organizations were fine, like happy with it, a third actually wouldn't go back, and then a third neither agree nor disagree on grant funding. Kind of, what's the kind of rationale behind those figures, I guess? Kind of what's on your point of getting talented, organizations, individuals to get the right level of money, which will help viability and scale and all that, which is what we're talking about. Kind of what's stopping that, especially for those from ethnic minoritized backgrounds?
I think once bitten, twice shy is certainly a thing. But there's a disconnect, I think, between funding institutions and those that get knocked back. See, we would talk to funders, and funders would say, look, just because we've turned you down, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't come back. What it basically means is it's a learning process, and you should learn from the experience and go away and come back and put more pressure on us. But I think for a lot of organizations, you've got precious time you're trying to divide between dealing with your client group, if you're a frontline service, or if you're grassroots, and having the time available to be making applications and pursuing, funders. So the general view is that, there's a high degree of subjectivity rather than understanding, that the door may still be open. And I think that the question of, especially when you're dealing with seed development, finance that is repayable for many organizations seems like pie in the sky. It's like the moon. But, I have always believed that it wasn't so much the question of people rejecting it in its entirety. And certainly our research and surveys bears out that there is still a market for things like repayable loans. But the actual quality of the product has to be the right product for the sector. And in terms of looking at BME organizations, like most organizations, they're probably governed by management committees and boards that are quite risk averse. So the question of grants is still important, but the question of then what comes next in terms of ensuring sustainability, can we develop a model of social investment that actually can meet those needs and also meet the needs of people who have their the strings to the resources. So for me, there's a lot of work to do in terms of making that disconnect a real connection that can work in the interest of both those that are institutions and those that are recipients of those kind of funds. I should assert, grant funding, I still think is going to be very important for the future. And certainly in terms of getting the engine of entrepreneurship running, definitely. But in our world, we're trying to marry two things, which is to meet social need as well as establish a basis for viability and in some instances profitability. So beyond the break-even point. So that's a huge challenge. But we draw on the experiences from across the world in terms of people who've managed to succeed and make this work. And certainly some of the case studies that we've come across in America, we know that this is potentially possible.
Okay, so there's inspiration from the States. And then we'll have social entrepreneurs listening in, kind of organizations or funders or social investors, lots of work still to do and need to figure it out. But in terms of people, looking into this type of finance, repayable money, any top organizations to look out for?
I think that obviously we at Voice for Change have formed a partnership with Bonnie Chu and Stephen Badeko to establish as founders the Pathway Fund, which is growing great guns and has launched programs to support a chain of intermediaries and also fund managers who I hope are going to create their own funds to support other organizations. I think our kind of spirit is very much encapsulated in the phrase, let a thousand flowers bloom. It's not just about growing Pathway, but actually Pathway, like Voice for Change, the job is to actually grow the sector and to support those organizations to do the things that they need to do to address social concerns, but also to do it in a framework that enables them to continue to reproduce themselves and function with a degree of longevity. Um, and to do that, it requires levels of, I think, capital that unfortunately the sector has been quite reticent in giving certainly Black and BME organizations access to. But I think we felt and saw it during the pandemic and COVID that the sector is capable of moving at pace and at speed and at scale when it needs to. I mean, even Voice for Change, I think in terms of our grants giving, we were not a grant giving organization before COVID, but we transformed ourselves into one within 6 months. Within 18 months, we distributed something like 2.4 million. So, at that level, things can happen. So the question then becomes, okay, if you're looking to make more strategic grant making, more strategic investment even, can we now carry that through into a kind of new era? So, in many ways, I'm quite excited about this period and what's unfolding, even though it's very tough. But I think there are definitely organizations that are like-minded that want to break through. The Phoenix Way is another project which, although is immersed in grant giving, being established through the lottery, but again is looking at the social investment space now to see if it can actually make its mark. You've got, as I say, we're kind of developing a coterie of new fund managers, and certainly if we can get some more resources, we'd like to add to the list of 5 managers that we've got at the moment, and and double that or even triple it, because the pipeline is definitely there.
Yeah, so very much worth looking at Pathway Fund, also the Phoenix Way Fund. Obviously, that's more kind of grant focused. And then I want to touch on stuff outside of funding, but just on the kind of COVID point's interesting on, this is a slight aside, I think, but the COVID point on, there was a crisis, loads of people came together, lottery, government, whoever, to give out more money, Voice for Change England. Arguably, there's been the riots over the summer, there's cost of living, the marketplace, it's proper tough out there for frontline organizations. And yet, you see in the news kind of trusts and foundations, some are closing down or some are pausing. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of money out there. I guess kind of your views on how we can make sure it is just tough out there, just how we don't kind of let organizations die, that kind of thing.
I think we did some analysis of this a while ago, and in fact, for the sector as a whole, the level of funding that's available hasn't actually changed that much. But what has changed is, I think, the restrictions on local authorities and the collapse of local authority grants to enterprises and voluntary organizations has meant that whereas groups would have been secure, maybe getting 60, 75% of their funding from a local authority, that's been cut back to probably around 25%, and in some cases to 0. So that then means, in terms of the charities and foundations, the competition then for grant funding has intensified as those groups come looking for money. So unfortunately, that's where we are. So it does feel like actually there's less money around, but in fact, it's probably roughly the same. And the foundations, I know, are acutely aware of the cost of living crisis and their particularly important role in addressing aspects of that. But as I say, there are aspects of the enterprise sector that do give me cause for hope. So, for example, the work that's been done with School for Social Entrepreneurs around match trading, developing grants that actually incentivize small enterprises to develop and scale upwards by increasing turnover, I think is a brilliant initiative. And, Alistair Wilson has got and his team have got a ton of evidence in relation to how that actually has impacted positively on the way that organizations have responded. You look at the work that's been done also around contract readiness, training organizations to understand the process of applying for government contracts, which has been a huge success with a massive waiting list of organizations and individuals trying to get on the training. It was supposed to end in December 2024, and has just been extended to run now through till April 2025. And with that also, we have the excitement of a new piece of legislation around procurement and contracts coming in February 25. And I'm hopeful that there'll be some aspects of ring fencing in those arrangements for small organizations. So, there's some really interesting things coming down the pipeline that I think we should get excited about in amongst, this tough terrain that we're in.
Yeah, reasons to be hopeful, and good plug for match trading, because obviously I help lead some of that. So nice.
Indeed.
I'll slip you a tenner later. Nice. And I mean on that, so we've spoken a bit about money, and we've got some questions coming in. Do feel free to write questions in the Q&A, folks, and then we'll come to them. So please do that throughout. And then you've touched on organizations getting contract ready for public sector contracts. Interested in knowing, what sort of skills or networks do social entrepreneurs need to start, building to become more sustainable, to scale? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you've touched on networks because when we came out of COVID, Voice for Change, we did a lot of survey work in asking questions about what were the next steps for organizations now we're coming out of the emergency. So what are like your 10 top priorities? And so we thought, well, obviously money is going to be at the top, but it didn't work out that way. In fact, it was networking and engagement that were top, with money coming actually on second. And I suppose to explain that, I think the general feeling is, particularly, and I'm speaking primarily from the BME sector, is that if you can get into the rooms, into the discussions, into the meetings, you can have the kind of exchange in order to then get access to the resources that you need. But if you're not in the discussions, then you can't get access to the resources. So a question of knowledge and education and meeting people is something that is really important. So one of the things that we've tried to do, taking on board what that data's told us, is to begin to organize, even periodically, just networking events and exchange events where people get together to meet. I mean, on the procurement contract readiness stuff, Charlie has done a lot at SEUK in terms of getting people together with commissioners, which is something that seldom happens, in our world. But to actually get frontline organizations in a room with commissioners who can explain to them one-to-one what they're looking for in terms of the contracts that they hold is a tremendous way of breaking down those barriers. I think creates problems for organizations seeking to get into that area, because there's hundreds of billions in contracts are let out by government every year. So it's a really important area for our sector in terms of engagement. But in addition to that, I know that one of the things that's come out of the training is also to look at the principles of what people have learned and see how we can apply that to accessing local authority contracts, which is not what the scheme was originally set up for. But it's clear that there are a lot of parallels between the training and what's needed to actually access local authority contracts. And of course, using your common sense, lots of small organizations, the first contracts they get in the kind of third sector are probably from their local authority. So as a development on from the original kind of remit with DCMS, we are now going to be looking in the new year at running some workshops and sessions around local government and accessing local government. As I say, in preparation for a new piece of legislation that will be coming in February 25.
And on the contracts bit, obviously we're part of that partnership together. We're working on that really well together. Another piece of feedback we regularly get is the sense that, oh, we're too small, or it's going to take us too much work to, really go after essentially this new income stream potentially of going for contract money. Just any advice on, why it's worth it, or, why you should do it. Everyone's time is tight, right? Focus is split. Yeah.
I think, it's obvious that for some contracts, the scale is absolutely huge. I saw one contract advertised the other day. There used to be a grant to Bernardo's, has now become a contract. It was around children in modern slavery. It's 33 million. And I was thinking, there are a lot of my organizations that work in that area, but probably would feel very unconfident about going for or even winning such a contract. So there is I think a responsibility on the part of infrastructure organizations like Voice for Change, and I think SSE and all of the other entrepreneurial kind of agencies to actually bring people together to see if we can potentially build consortia. Consortia is not easy. Partnerships, arrangements can be difficult. But if we're serious about getting small organizations to be able to punch above their weight in this space, then we have to find better ways of forming collaboration. And I think, the government, is open increasingly to making sure that competition is fair and that people can compete. But I think that, we're still feeling our way into developing frameworks of how we build consortia that really, really work. So I think over the next few years, we are going to be tested in terms of being able to develop in the real what those things mean and how they can win contracts. I really do want to see the end result coming home, which is to win the contract, not just to be able to bid. And I think when we can get to that point and be able to demonstrate and show people that, look, these people have done it, so it is possible, I think we'll be opening the door for a lot more partnerships and collaborative kind of approaches.
Yeah. And there's so many little nuggets and tips you've come here with, Kunle, like one on consortia building. How do we as a sector work together? Because, we might be too small individually, but collectively we'll be able to win kind of bigger value work. Two, kind of spending time to investigate contracts, public sector contracts, whether at a local level or national level. Right money at the right time. So kind of repayable finance might be a little bit more risky, but actually it might be the right step for you as an organization. And then also the point around kind of networks and access to networks. And that's something Voice for Change is, putting on more networking events. We are at SSE as well. Before I kind of go to Q&A with the audience, and please feel free to whack stuff in the Q&A function, folks. You've mentioned government a few times, and a new government specifically, obviously Labour have come in over the summer. On a kind of grander kind of policy level, then thoughts on what should the likes of Voice for Change England or SSE or actually all frontline organisations on the theme of scaling BME organisations, social organisations, what things should we be advocating for or pushing on with the new government?
I had the opportunity, in fact, last week of being able to meet with DCMS and its minister, Lisa Nandy, and Stephanie Peacock, the new Minister for Civil Society. it does appear that they're looking to establish a new compact with the third sector, or they call it a covenant. But some of you will remember the old compact voice, which laid down principles in terms of how government and local government would engage with the voluntary sector. If I'm honest, the compact was quite one-sided. I think we took it very seriously in terms of the principles, but I'm not sure that local government or central government did. But you know, they made it clear, and I did make a point to the minister about reticence, that they are going to make sure that this covenant is more solid and has more meaning, both in terms of government and the sector. But I think that we have to make sure that we hold the government to account, but we also need to look at ourselves in terms of making sure that things like, you know, data, that we are gathering the right information to present to them on which they can make decisions that are meaningful for us. I think for a long time, again, it's almost like we've been talking different languages in terms of what we think is important as indicators of need and success, and indicators of failure. If we can agree on the indicators at an empirical level, God, wouldn't that be a massive change, instead of all the bits of information that we're often pushing at government. I think in terms of the equalities realm, we need to not just look at pay equality. I think the new legislation primarily is focused on pay equality. It doesn't look at pay discrimination. So I think there's some flaws in the actual legislation that we need to kind of unpick. Otherwise, there's this danger of bringing in new legislation, which is actually inferior to legislation that currently exists. So, you know, I really wanted to see the government succeed, and I wanted to do well. But there are areas where we're going to rub up against them. And of course, there's an old perennial for non-profits, which is the issue of VAT. Why it is that we're zero rated, but yet we are still paying VAT, and we're not included in current VAT arrangements, so we can't claim it back through the tax system. So, you know, there are some old chestnuts there that really need to be addressed, and that's been the case for decades.
And on the first one of the covenant, the kind of principle behind, or the compact, the principle behind it is government wanting to work closer with or listen to the sector more. Because I know we'll include it in the follow-up to this webinar. There is a kind of consultation period that's kind of gone out now, where, you know, everyone on this call can feed in. There's a kind of consultation form where you can feed in. Have I got that right? I'm kind of half-assed.
That's right. We're in a consultation period. They made a point of stressing the fact that they weren't just going to draft the principles of a new covenant. They wanted, you know, some co-design from the sector, and I think that's great. But it's one thing to, you know, design stuff. It's another thing to then enact it and implement it.
Yeah. We've got a truck of questions have come in, so we'll throw to that, and do keep them coming, everyone. So one is from Tessa Dugmore, and this was around the procurement conversation earlier, Kunle, around, is the procurement legislation you're referring to, or consultation you're referring to, an update on the Social Value Act, or something else?
No, it's something else. It's a new bill, soon to become an act, which a whole group of people have been working on for a number of years and commenting on, led by Claire Dove from the Crown Review Service. And so things like social value certainly inform some of the work around it, with, for example, in the evaluation of contracts, social value will have a certain percentage in terms of how people make decisions who are commissioners. So I think it's 10%, but it varies across the government departments. Ministry of Justice, in fact, it's going to be as high as 25% in terms of their decision making. So there are some amazing changes coming down the line in relation to procurement, which again, I think is quite exciting. 10% is not going to make, I think, a huge difference, but it will mean that it will level the playing field a little bit. But 25% will make a significant difference to a number of organizations. I'm sure of that.
And that's in the works, is it? I mean, that is reason to be hopeful. That's led by Claire Dove. Yeah. Okay.
So in looking at the Social Value Act and how it's implemented, the connection has been made with the procurement process, and so I think it's one that is really, really important. The flip side of this, though, is of course making sure that our members and our people understand what social value is and how to actually use it.
And just so we're under no illusion, why don't you just explain that for us very quickly? Social value, what is it?
In terms of the contracts, rather than just simply making an assessment based on the cost, who's bidding puts in the lowest cost, it means that for 25% of the marks in terms of how they mark it up, there'll be an assessment of what value the person putting the bid forward makes at a social level that is different. And so it means that I like to think that organizations get judged not just on the merits of the cost of their bid, but also what the added value is of them being involved in that contract.
Yeah. And in theory, that would enable, third sector organization not only to bid and win work, but potentially, if they partnered with a corporate, they could come in and help raise the social as well. Okay. And then we've got another question here from Susie from Lotus Collaborations UK. So this is going back to the previous conversation around grants and BME organizations kind of once bitten, twice shy, really, kind of getting knocked back and then not really reapplying. So the question is it your view, Kunle, that a reapplication should be reworked, changed, or presented again? It's difficult to assess when you have an application turned down with no feedback given and limited time, whether essentially should you just go back? Is it worth doing that?
I think it's always worth talking to the grants officers, even if you're not getting a formal reply, and going back and also looking at the guidance. Experienced as I am, and my team at Voice for Change we still make mistakes, and so it's always good to go back and review the guidance, because there's usually something in it that you've probably overlooked and not really fully understood. But on the other hand, let's be clear, funders have limited resources. And so there is a competitive element in relation to the best bids. But again, going back to this thing about networking and relationships, I think that's also important. One of the things that we found during COVID was some of the projects that we wanted to support in emergency situations. Some of the businesses, the people who ran them were illiterate and couldn't actually fill forms, even if they wanted to, even if they found the time. So we had to rethink as an infrastructure organization, then how do we approach that problem? And so we had to arrange for people to work one-to-one with those organizations who were providing great services at a time when they were needed, but were not fully engaged in the approach to written applications, which is what we were demanding of people. Conventional online, you do this, you do that, and follow it through. Well, there's some organizations that are not very good at meeting the service users as needs, but they're brilliant at filling in applications because they've got it down pat. But do we want a world where we're only looking at organizations from one perspective? If we're serious about trying to address needs, then we need to actually be a bit more flexible ourselves. Not that, we don't do our due diligence or undermine the quality of what we want to do, but there are different ways of approaching these things, and we need to think about that a bit more.
Yeah, because you're saying there's 2 points that have come out for me there, which is one on the, if you're applying for grants, you need to get on the phone, do speak to grant managers. Some of their stuff is, relationship based. It's not just put in an application and then hope for the best. There's kind of trying to do that. And then on the other side, also for the funders in the room or infrastructure bodies in the room, how do we be as kind of equitable and inclusive as possible? But actually there are amazing organizations delivering brilliant services, but in this case they might be illiterate or or whatever. So it's kind of understanding how we're not locking people out of locking talent out really, and what do we do there? And another question that's come in is around the point around partnerships, and I guess it was kind of building consortia, how to work with others. Any thoughts on how do you identify the right partner, and how do you identify so other social organizations to co-bid with or co-partner with? Thoughts on that, because I guess there's a risk of it sounds great in theory, collaboration, but then you're also like, oh gosh, like, are they going to screw me over? Are they not?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's general principles and making sure that you're aligned in terms of the vision of what it is you want to do. I think you can always trade and negotiate what the actual terms are, but if you're not kind of one to the same vision, then that's where you have a problem right at the start. In terms of the equality of relationships and structures, all those things can be negotiated, but it's really important that you're clear on what you want as an outcome and what you see as an outcome or outcomes in terms of the project. And I think I always approached partnership as there's always a certain degree of compromise. But if you're not prepared to make those compromises, then it's not for you. Because give and take is what makes those relationships work. But I think the process of kind of a legal framework and templates that enable you to get into an agreement, all well and good, and those are technical solutions. But there's a political question as well in terms of the kind of end goal and the vision, and that's where you really have to be aligned.
So shared vision, compromise, and I think that point, Kunle, on it's all good and well having the paperwork and all of that, but if there's not that trust and desire to do the right thing and go in the same direction, then it's going to be hard going. So
yeah,
that makes total sense. And then on the compromise bit, I guess what you mean there is social organizations, they might have this is a purity in how they do things maybe, or their approach, and then is that what you mean? And you need to
I mean, so for example, in taking on, let's say, a social investment grant, you might have somebody who says, we're never going to take on repayable finance ever. And then somebody on the rest of the board said, but this is what we want to do if we want to grow. And so these things have to be discussed. And somebody at some point has to make a compromise. And it might be that instead of taking on 30% repayable finance in a grant deal, you take on only 20%. And that's the compromise that you'll make. But the vision in terms of the outcome that people are looking for has to be the same. in order to make it work. Because if people are looking for different things, then you know at a certain point, no matter how much agreement there is, it's going to fall apart.
Yeah. And on that, you mentioned social investment at the start, and you also mentioned risk appetite and people being worried. And a big thing that we get on our programs all the time, it comes up kind of regardless of size really, and regardless of theme, is we're keen to do social investment, or we're keen to launch this new trading model, or but it's our boards are the ones stopping us because they're risk averse, that and I mean, yeah, thoughts on how you navigate that really. And it'd be interesting on whether, not really to dish the dirt on Voice for Change England, but like examples of your own, you're part of multiple boards, and you've got your own board at Voice for Change England, kind of, yeah, navigating the kind of non-exec layer of your organization.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about this before, having this discussion. I think charities are in an unusual position in that we're one of the few institutions that actually our job is to put ourselves out of business.
Yeah.
That's our objective. But so, I think boards are risk averse, but I kind of think about it as, do you know what? They actually rebalance perhaps other people's subjectivism in terms of pursuing objectives that need to be thought through in a sober way. And so you may be the person that's got, the creative instincts and the brilliance, and no, but you need to have that kind of angel sitting on your shoulder, obviously, telling you about, the risks and making sure that there's a counterbalance so that you're making the right decisions. So as much as I might even find it frustrating at Voice for Change sometimes that my board says no, I think it's important that they do, because it balances out my kind of subjectivism sometimes, to be brought back down to earth to then think, okay, I'm going to go away and I'm going to rethink what the business case is, and maybe I'll come back with a stronger presentation.
Yeah. I I didn't think you'd say that. I thought you'd be advocating for scrap all boards, but no, yeah, great. Yeah. Come back with a stronger case. Love it. And I mean, we're running out of time now, but I guess the kind of last thing I wanted to leave you with is, if you've been doing this, you're a very wise man. You've been doing this a long time. Kind of, if you had a kind of magic wand on, what we could change on a kind of policy level, so that on this point of the three phases you mentioned right at the start, which is, first off, it was reach, get more BME organizations in the market. Then it was kind of viability, get them to survive. And now we're talking scale. How do we get these organizations to really kind of be kind of national solutions, or really have kind of depth of impacts? I guess on that bit, kind of, if you had a magic wand and, you were prime minister or whatever, kind of the big thing you'd want, central government or policymakers to change overnight?
I think both government and large foundations being able to make repayable loans at zero rate of interest, which I know some foundations have thought about doing this, so it's not completely pie in the sky. So, as I said at the beginning, some of the actual quality of the products, service products, is just not good enough. And I think if we could do that at scale, that would be one way of easing organizations into a situation where they could really grow. I'm not saying, you don't do the due diligence, still have to do all of that and all the other checks and balances. But to have that weight taken off you, and maybe with a 3-year repayment-free period, 2 years, whatever, then I think you'd be really talking about stimulating growth. But if we continue to do a lot of kind of piecemeal, small incremental things, we're not going to really see the kind of engine revving at in the way that it could.
repayment loans, repayment grants at zero. That'd be our little headline that we send to Pioneers Post. That's great. Uh, and that way we'll really stimulate BME organizations to, and not only grow, but change their mindset to be more entrepreneurial into one of trading as well. And kind of final question to you then, which is kind of the one thing we'll have a lot of kind of frontline practitioners on the call. The kind of one thing that you want people to take away in this kind of uh, optimistic, you've got given us loads of reasons to be optimistic, reasons to be optimistic market, but also, tough going market. Kind of one thing you want to leave people with.
Just keep going, because the longer you hang in there, the easier it gets. And I know that there are people out there are probably doing a day job as well as trying to run their enterprise and business. But like you, I have interests in terms of enterprise that I've had involvement in for many years. I used to, even when I was in local government, I used to work for a period of time in Spain, leaving my desk job at 6 o'clock on a Friday night, working through the weekend, then leaving Spain at 7 o'clock in the morning, Monday morning, and coming back. So, those things can be valuable experiences and also arm you with the kind of thick skin that you'll need to actually succeed.
Kunle, thank you so much. You've covered a whole array of stuff from social investment to procurement to the launch of the Pathway Fund to networks to all of it really. So loads to go off. And in the follow-up message to everyone here, we'll drop in kind of various links too. So one being the kind of central government covenant consultation, so people can feed into that. So do look out for all of that. And thanks everyone for joining us on this Friday webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it. Yeah, big thank you, and big thank you, Kunle. See you all soon, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.